I've covered a lot of feminists and social justice warriors over the last year, particularly in the gaming industry, but one area I haven't investigated yet is open source software. I've got with me today two guests who are going to talk about a recent controversy that erupted and their views on the social justice incursion into this area of technology that we don't often hear quite so much about. Eric Raymond and Meredith Patterson. Thanks so much both for joining me.
Thank you.
We're glad to be here.
Eric, if perhaps you could just explain briefly who you are, and then we'll move on to Meredith, and I'll have a couple of questions for you afterwards.
I'm a longtime hacker. I work on a lot of infrastructure and open source projects. If you have Google Maps in your phone, you rely on code that I wrote every day. You can't use a browser or a gaming box or even an ATM without relying on other code that I wrote. And I helped found the modern open source movement.
Thank you. And Meredith?
Well, I co-founded the field of language theoretic security about 5 years ago. And I also started earlier this year a think tank called Weaponized Social, which focuses on much of the same issues that we've been talking about, increasing aggression online.
Eric, you posted on your blog a story recently that captured the imagination of a lot of people who've been worried about the incursion of hand-wringers and pearl clutchers into the technology industry in all of its various forms. Tell us briefly what your blog post said. What do you say happened?
I heard from a source that is known to me, but which I'm not going to disclose because his career could be destroyed, that Linus Torvalds takes pains never to be alone at technical conferences anymore, and always travels with a posse, because there were repeated attempts by a now defunct women in tech advocacy group called the Ada Initiative to set him up for a sexual assault accusation.
That's a very extraordinary claim, isn't it? And many observers of the social justice movement won't be hugely surprised by it, because we're used to seeing these people make extraordinary claims. We're used to seeing them up to no good on social media. But the fact that one of them in real life would be trying to set people up with fake allegations of sexual assault is really quite extraordinary.
And your post is very extraordinary. We can ask Tim Hunt about it.
Right, of course, the scientist who was accused of making jokes about women in tech, of course, he was actually making a self-deprecating joke, and yet Connie St. Louis, a woman who fabricated facts on her own CV and is, astonishingly, a professor of science journalism at a university in London, accused him of sexism and forced him to resign. It was an extraordinary story. So I suppose, yes, anybody who has been following the travails of the technology industry and various figures in it is used to feminists coming after the stereotypical straight white male. Meredith, have you seen any examples in your work and in your life of these sorts of weird and creepy campaigns against people on the basis of their own skin color or sexual orientation?
It tends to be more thought crime, actually. I've been following the Ada Initiative since it was founded, of course. This is something in my wheelhouse, and this is an organization that, was claiming to advocate for me and represent me. And yet the founder of the Ada Initiative exhibited some really bizarre behaviors, like, pursuing vendettas against other women in the technology field. She went after Violet Blue, who's a pretty well-known speaker on both technology and sexual health, and got one of her talks pulled from the B-Side San Francisco Security Conference because she claimed that it was going to trigger people. Having spoken to the organizer of that conference, I'm actually pretty dubious about that claim, given her behavior when she contacted them to try to get this talk pulled. Her attitude was very, this is obviously absurd. This is going to get people hurt. Completely refusing to take a look at the history of hacker community talks that have taken direct looks at social problems in the hacker community, such as drug use and sexual promiscuity. For some reason, she decided that none of that mattered, and that only the opinions of her and her posse mattered. They managed to completely drive the dialogue there.
Eric, it seems to me there's something weird going on, both in technology and also in the video games industry. These are industries that are male-dominated, if you like, but they're dominated by a particular kind of man who is, racked with white middle-class guilt, if you want to put it like that, about diversity and female representation. It's an industry that both the gaming and the technology industries have such an undeserved reputation, in my view, for being terrible places for women to work. They're actually some of the most welcoming, tolerant, and pleasant places that any minority or marginalized person could ever hope to end up in. Why do they both have such a bad reputation, and why do people within those industries themselves sort of pearl clutch endlessly about diversity and representation? Why do you think this is happening? Because it seems to me that if you compare it to the law, or if you compare it to almost any other profession, journalism even, tech and gaming are pretty great places for women to be, aren't they?
I think it's a form of virtue signaling. People believe that they're sending the right virtue signals and tribal identification phrases by being hugely publicly concerned about these issues, even or perhaps especially if there's actually nothing much going on.
But the thing is, if you look at their actual behavior, if you look at their revealed preferences, that doesn't stand up to serious scrutiny, because this is the same group of people that, for instance, when Andrea Shepherd from the Tor Project was being gang mobbed by crazies who were fans of Pando Daily, they were trying to take down the Tor Project, and so they decided to go after one of the developers. She called out to the Geek Feminism Wiki maintainers for help, and they were like, oh yeah, we'll get right on that, because she's a libertarian and they don't want anything to do with her.
That's interesting, isn't it? I noticed a tweet from Dana Lash, who's an American conservative commentator, about the South by Southwest Harassment Summit. Now, those who are listening who don't know what that is, there were two panels planned about video games. Neither of them were described as being explicitly pro or against the notorious movement that shall not be mentioned from the last 18 months. But both of them got pulled because of claims of harassment and threats of abuse and all the rest of it. And then various left-wing media organizations came out and suggested that they wouldn't attend South by Southwest unless there was, some serious changes and harassment was properly addressed and various other things. So now there's an all-day harassment summit at the next South by Southwest conference. And what Dana Lash noticed is that of all of the speakers, and they have a huge lineup of what London Spectator magazine would call cry bullies, the people who exist in sort of this quantum superstate between aggressor and victim, constantly provoking people and then crying foul when they get a response. Of all of the extraordinary list of people up there to complain about the supposed abuse and harassment that they get merely for being women, merely for being minorities in the tech and gaming industries, there wasn't a single conservative. Eric, to what extent do you think that this is that politics play a role in who gets defended and who doesn't?
I have opinions about this, but I don't think it should be part of the conversation. If we talk about this as a left versus right issue, we get dragged into a lot of disputes that I frankly consider irrelevant.
Yeah, no, I think it's really more of an essentialist issue. I mean, there's a very narrow view of femininity that is promulgated by these women in tech groups. It's very neurotypical. It's can interact easily and fluently with business and marketing folks. And that certainly corresponds to a lot of the people who want to have jobs in technology. But many of the people, particularly women who find technology to be a welcoming and comforting place, are people who in part ended up there because other career fields are awkward and hostile towards them.
Right. I've noticed a couple of codes of conduct in the open source community pop up in various blog posts, and I think my colleague at Breitbart, Alan Bukhari, did a report about one of them. They always seem to be fueled by social justice warriors. They use language that sounds perfectly unobjectionable, about abuse and harassment and all the rest of it. But have you noticed a rise in these, and are they yet being misused to sort of punish people who are thinking the wrong way?
Well, shortly after I posted my thing about the ADA initiative apparently going after Linus, I learned of a rather blood-chilling little incident where somebody using the handle Django Con Cardiff effectively demanded that one of his pull requests, that's a kind of software modification, be merged into a project because he's a person of color and not doing so is discriminatory. Well, it's actually a little more vague than that. He was careful to craft his language so that if you squinted, you could say he was just calling for diversity. But the thing is, when he did this, he said, I suggest you adopt this particular code of conduct. which is, well, it's a bunch of SJW rhetoric. And the phrase that really bothered me when I read it was that it was opposed to what it called the cult of meritocracy.
Go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, if you remember the controversy a month or so ago about the Opal open source project, the writer of the Contributor Covenant Code of Conduct decided to filed an issue with that software saying one of your maintainers is saying transphobic things on Twitter, and was trying to police the project and get them to kick out one of their maintainers over something that the maintainer had said completely outside of the venue.
Right. I think Meredith and I want to be clear about this. This is completely against hacker values. You do not censure or ban or exile people for what they do as people outside of the project. You judge by the work, not by the person. I don't care what kind of bigot or what kind of weirdo somebody is when they're not writing code. If their code is good, I'll take it, and if their code isn't, I won't. And that's how it's got to be, because we need the best excellence we can get, and we can't afford to obsess about personalities or beliefs or any other irrelevances.
I pointed out in an essay last year that Hans Reiser straight up murdered his wife, and there are still people who use his file system.
I mean, it's an interesting point, isn't it? Because programming, the sorts of high-level skills it requires can sometimes attract marginalized, quirky people. And those of us who love technology fall, into that bracket too, to some degree. It's interesting this hacker culture has developed where people just try to separate the work from the person, which is, of course, how we have to approach most things in history. We do the same thing with composers. We do the same thing with philosophers. And because social mores and political fashions change, there are many people who, would be considered today bigots, but that we nonetheless revere for their work. So there was a science award recently that one of my colleagues at Breitbart wrote about, where the statue for this award is H.P. Lovecraft. And social justice warriors have demanded that H.P. Lovecraft's image should be removed and that the statue should be changed because he apparently was a bigot according to today's values. It's a very extraordinary sort of rewriting of history that's going on. One of the strategies that I've seen them use, and something that is sort of equal parts fascinating and terrifying, is what you, Eric, call Kafka trapping. Can you explain to us what that means and give us an example?
Right. A Kafka trap is an accusation that is unfalsifiable because it denies the accused person any standing to present evidence, even about their own state of mind.
So this might be used if you were accused of racism or something?
Right. It's a Kafka trap when your denial that you're a racist is taken as evidence in itself that you suffer from insidious unconscious racism.
So this is the idea of sort of entrenched patriarchal values that can insidiously sort of work their way into people's unconscious ideas. That you could be racist without realizing that you're being racist, or indeed doing anything racist, or your actions having any racist consequences, but nonetheless there is some sort of atmosphere of racism at play, which always seems...
And there are lots of variations of the Kafka trap. I want to get back to the core of my complaint against the social justice warriors, which is that we have, and it's not about left versus right, it's that we have this norm in the hacker culture that you judge by the work, not the person, and that we are, by intention, we are a refuge for every talented misfit in the world that wants to do something meaningful with their lives. And the social justice warriors are trying to destroy that.
But it also goes a little further than that. It's worse than that, isn't it? Because not only are they drawing attention to and placing unnecessary stress on somebody's real-world identity and beliefs versus what they produce in code, but it seems to me that they're inventing grievances too. So they're not even going after people for what they say in real life. They're going after people for what they don't say, for what they haven't said, for what they haven't really done. And this honey trap that you identified in your blog post, which according to your post goes further than just Linus Torvalds and maybe something that the Ada Initiative was attempting to level on other men too. This is an example not just of drawing attention to what people do in real life, or even of inferring bad motives. This is just outright destructive, man-hating lies, isn't it?
I do think, though, that we have to look very carefully at the specific people involved. I mean, Valerie Aurora has a long-standing history of basically stabbing people in the back and doing her very level best to find ways to humiliate people. mean, very shortly after the Ada Initiative was founded, Valerie got into a scrap with Shanley Kane, of all people, because Shanley had called offense on something that the company Geek List had done, and Val stepped in to mediate. And she apparently proposed that they record a humiliating video of themselves in their underwear in order to apologize. And like this, even Shanley thought that was beyond the pale.
Right, the Shanley Kane versus Val Aurora catfight. Why did I not have the popcorn concession for this?
Well, as regular listeners and readers will know, I've had my own run-ins with Shanley Kane, who is my favorite person on the internet. I have to be honest, she is wonderful. I don't know what I'd do if Shanley ever left the internet. She's great, but she is one of Silicon Valley's most prominent, troublesome social justice warriors. I mean, she's clearly on a lot of medication. It's interesting to watch these people tear chunks out of each other, and they do seem to be just as ruthless attacking each other as they are other people. But the evidence you brought to light, Eric, suggests that they've sort of run out of targets, and instead they've turned to manufacturing them instead. It's a very distressing and troubling development. The Ada Initiative in particular, perhaps, Meredith, you could give us a sense of who was involved beyond the person you've already mentioned. Where have they gone now? What are they doing now? And maybe after that, Eric, you could comment on why are these people in tech at all when they seem to hate it so much? They don't like the people. They don't like the work. They don't believe in meritocratic systems. They don't, believe in any of the things that the industry seems to stand for. Why are they around at all? Meredith, could you start us off with just sort of telling us who some of these people are?
Well, the other co-founder of the Ada Initiative was a woman named Mary Gardner. She and Val were both pretty prominent members of a group called Linux Chicks, which was kind of a reservoir of, if cultural libertarianism is welcoming of many cultures, I guess cultural authoritarianism is probably the best way to describe this, but just a very cultural authoritarian brand of feminism. All throughout the 90s, they had this mailing list where they continually complained about all of the horrible things that, made them victims. But it didn't really catch it didn't really catch broad public appeal until about 2011. I was never really involved because, their activities were things like starting a hackerspace called Double Union, where people had to apply and demonstrate their feminist bona fides, their allegiance to the cause in order to be members at all, which is just weird because I'm used to the hacker scene being a place where, no matter, like Eric said, no matter how bizarre you are, you're welcome there. 10 years ago, when I first started going to HackerCons, there were already, way more like out gay people or out trans people than you would ever see in the broader public sphere. And that was a decade ago.
This is what I've always found extraordinary about the continual bombardment of sort of, self-loathing, sort of lashes to the back that you get from activists in the tech and gaming worlds. These industries where minorities are vastly overrepresented and they find very happy homes. That being the case, Eric, why are these social justice warriors in tech at all? Why are they here?
Search me. I don't understand how their minds work.
Well, that's fair.
Except in that I recognize the classic action patterns and idea patterns of totalitarianism. I understand them on that level, but I don't understand why they're here.
One of the groups that's extraordinarily complicit in this, in my view, is the press. And if you take, the sort of social justice and grievance culture as a whole, you can see all sorts of things going wrong elsewhere in the industry. Joe Lonsdale, one of the founders of Palantir, was wrongly accused of rape, as Brad Wardell, the CEO and founder of Stardocker Game Studio, was too. And in both cases, the press leapt on these allegations and reported them as though they were fact. And it seems to me that there's a sort of an eagerness in the tech press to report anything that paints straight white men in a bad light, anything that paints women as victims. The press will leap on these things, throw out, with such wild abandon, they throw out all, journalistic seriousness and responsibility. And, in the case of Lonsdale, the Joe Lonsdale, the founder, one of the co-founders of Palantir, If there were words like horrifying, sickening, and horrific being thrown around. Business Insider ran a headline that described the allegations as horrifying. They said they'd make your stomach turn. And it turns out it's all nonsense. This extraordinary thing. Do either of you have any experience with the press here and how the media has sort of been complicit in this weird distortion of the way it really is to work in tech?
Well, I think it's a broader pattern of media in general. Parker Malloy put out a great piece on Medium yesterday about 5 things the media does to inflate outrage. So there's that. I mean, the media knows that there is an audience that will just eat up feminist outrage, and they're desperate for clicks, so they do that.
I suppose so, but it's extraordinary that the direction, the sort of trajectory of outrage is so uniform in the direction of social justice.
It's compassion porn.
That's a good word for it. It's a lovely. I'm going to start steal that from you and start using that in columns. That's lovely.
Credit it to Saint Rev on Twitter because that's where I got it from. But yeah, I mean, it's the University of Virginia story that that was debunked. The one that ran in Rolling Stone is just a brilliant example of this compassion porn narrative because it doesn't have to be true. Questioning whether the events actually happened is like asking the woman in the porn whether she came.
Right. So, this is Emma Solkowitz at Columbia, who, there's no evidence whatsoever that she was ever raped. The guy now is, Paul Nungesser is now launching a lawsuit, which makes for harrowing reading against Columbia, actually, in the way in which the university didn't just turn a blind eye, but actively conspired to help her publicize a fake rape claim, or what may well turn out to be a fake rape claim, certainly a claim for which there's no evidence. They're allowing her to take this mattress. There's a sort of weird thing with the social justice warriors I've noticed is this combination of sort of aggressor and victim. They are happy to play the victim, provided they also get to aggressively publicize, whether it's for professional advantage, notoriety, or financial profit, the things that they allege happened to them. And it's an extraordinary sort of psychology that has led, I guess because they think they can act with such impunity because the media is...
This is a standard psychological manipulation technique. I mean, so is guilt trips, so is shaming, so is projection.
Yeah.
So is lying by omission.
I suppose so. And this compassion porn that we see in the press has led them to believe they can behave with such impunity that they now think that they can stage honey traps to capture people who didn't even do anything. Is there any reason why Linus Torvalds in particular is a target for this, do you think?
Because he's probably the most important single tribal elder we have.
Right. So they're going for they're tired of punching down, and now they're going for the big guy.
Linus's position is hands down the most important position in the open source community. He is the person who has the keys to the kernel.
And I interpret the attempt to run a honey trap against him as an attempt to shame, discredit, and guilt trip the entire hacker culture so that it would become politically pliable.
I see. So he's almost a sort of proxy for the whole industry in a way, because he is one of those meritocracy guys, because he sort of doesn't mind what he says. It can be a little bit provocative sometimes. He's used as a sort of symbol for the whole industry. And if you get him, by implication, you're establishing that the entire industry is rotten.
Right. And well, industry is not quite the right word here, because we're a voluntary community that is partly inside industry and partly outside it. But with that qualification, yes. And the other thing that taking him down would have been was a warning to every other thought leader in the community, including in our different ways, Meredith and myself. Watch it, you could be next.
It must be very scary to work.
If not me, then possibly my fiance or one of the other men I'm close to.
It must be quite an oppressive environment for the two of you. Have either of you taken precautions yourselves, or are you now more careful about what you say in public? Do you have fewer discussions? I mean, it's been even brave in a way to come and talk to me about it, because this will, I'm sure to some extent, make you a target of the worst elements on the internet. But have either of you had to take precautions in any way?
Personally, my style when I'm frightened of something is to get angry and charge it. So
you are a man after my own heart.
They made a bad mistake trying to intimidate me, even indirectly, and they're gonna pay for that. But as for taking precautions, as I said in my blog post, I'm going to be careful not to be alone at conferences myself for exactly that reason. But I will not be silenced. I will not be silenced.
Your source for your blog post also indicated he would be more reluctant now to mentor young women because he worries about being left alone with them. That is an indication of how the social justice movement directly harms precisely the people they claim to defend, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I think it's a tremendous shame, and what pisses me off about it more than anything else is that, I mean, this is Schrodinger's rapist in reverse. This is the same bad argument of, because some men might be terrible, we have to treat all men as if they are terrible, and it's applying it the same way, which I think is wrong. I think we need to figure out better, more explicit ways of essentially figuring out whether somebody is operating in good faith or not. And I mean, this is a problem that the intelligence community has been facing for a very long time. So, I don't necessarily have any convictions that we can solve it. But we're going to have to do that. Otherwise, the hacker community is going to tear itself apart by freezing to death. And I can't see that happen.
So one last question for you both. Give me a sense, because this is not my world. You guys are the experts here. The majority of the sort of hacker and open source community, you guys know a lot of people. Do the majority agree with the social justice warriors there's a problem? Are most of them furious, but they feel unable to comment on it? Is the community split? Are some people wondering, oh, really? Is this a problem? Are we guilty of this? What's the sort of general feeling in the open source community about the complaints that are being leveled against it?
I can only tell you what I know and emphasize what my uncertainties are. I know that I've gotten a lot of private email and a lot of pings on IRC from people saying, thank you for speaking up. I was too afraid to. But I mean, this is my job. When you're a tribal elder and one of the ambassadors to the world, you have to do this.
I mean, the problem is most hackers are focused on the thing they hack on, whatever that is. They don't want to focus on a bunch of culture war stuff that's getting dragged in to their world by opportunists who are trying to make names for themselves. They don't want to have to deal with people who think, oh, if I can just get a pull request accepted by this popular project on GitHub, that'll look good on my resume, and so I'm going to browbeat people into accepting my pull requests on non-technological grounds. They don't need this in their lives, and I think a lot of people just aren't really sure what to do, but they also don't want to look like assholes. But it's possible to say, no, I don't accept this reasoning, I think this epistemology is bankrupt, without looking like an asshole.
Sure.
To finish answering your question, I don't know. There could be a huge reservoir of sympathy out there for the SJWs, but my sense is that most people are keeping their heads down and hoping the shitstorm will blow over.
Well, I'm sure they're all grateful on either side of the fence for you two at least expressing an opinion in either direction, because it's something that a lot of people are very worried about doing in Silicon Valley and in the gaming industry. So open source appears to be, like the gamers were, an industry or at least a community where there are some people a little braver and prepared to have the discussion in the open. Thank you very much both for joining us. It's been a fascinating discussion, and wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.